If you spend enough time studying Iron Age Scandinavia, one uncomfortable truth keeps surfacing. Vikings were not just raiders and traders. They were masters of controlled survival in places that honestly should not have sustained permanent life. Greenland, northern Iceland, the Faroes, and Arctic Norway were not conquered by brute force, but by domestic knowledge so effective it was guarded, restricted, and in some cases deliberately withheld. Tonight I want to walk you through one of those techniques. Not a myth, not a romanticized saga detail, but a practical home system so central to survival that some settlers were explicitly discouraged from sharing it outside their kin group. This was not about secrecy for power. It was about preventing collapse in regions where, one bad winter could erase an entire settlement. Stay with me, because this knowledge explains why some Viking farms lasted centuries while others vanished without trace. What most modern reconstructions get wrong is assuming Viking homes were simply crude shelters with fires in the middle. The longhouse was not the secret. The technique was how heat, moisture, animals and human bodies were integrated into a single living organism. This system reduced fuel needs, prevented structural rot, and stabilized interior temperatures in Arctic wind conditions that would destroy most modern cabins. This opening minute matters, because once you understand this, you stop seeing Viking survival as luck or toughness. You start seeing it as engineering driven by necessity. How Arctic Viking settlements were designed to trap and recycle heat without burning themselves alive. The core of the technique was layered thermal zoning inside the home. Archaeology from Greenland sites like Brattahlid shows that Viking homes were not uniformly heated spaces. Instead, they were deliberately uneven. The central hearth was kept relatively small, producing less flame and more sustained embers. The real heat retention came from how the structure itself behaved. Thick turf walls, often exceeding 1 metre in width, were stacked with alternating layers of sod and stone. Turf was not insulation in the modern sense. It was a thermal battery. During the day, body heat, animal heat and fire heat slowly warmed the walls. At night, that stored warmth radiated back inward. What made this system dangerous to teach casually was that it depended on precise airflow control. Roof vents were minimal and sometimes adjustable with hide flaps. Too much airflow and, the heat escaped. Too little and carbon monoxide became lethal. This balance was learned through apprenticeship, not instruction manuals. You learned it by living inside it from childhood. How animals were integrated into Viking homes without turning them into disease pits. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Viking homes is animal housing. In high Arctic settlements, livestock were often brought inside or directly adjacent to living quarters during winter. Not as an afterthought, but as part of the heating system. Body heat from cattle, sheep and goats raised ambient temperatures several degrees, enough to prevent freezing even when fires were minimal. The silence around this technique likely came from its fragility. Animals produced moisture, waste gases and pathogens. Vikings managed this by elevating human sleeping platforms and by constructing shallow drainage channels beneath animal areas that wicked moisture outward through turf layers. This required constant maintenance. If ignored, mold, parasites and respiratory illness followed quickly. Teaching this improperly could kill an entire household. Modern survivalists can, really apply this principle by understanding controlled cohabitation with heat-producing systems. In a modern off-grid cabin, battery banks, water heaters, or even composting systems can be placed strategically to warm shared walls, reducing fuel usage. The Viking lesson is integration, not separation. Why Viking sleep placement mattered more than fire placement. Excavations show that sleeping benches were positioned along the inner walls, not near the hearth. This seems counterintuitive until you understand radiant heat behavior. The walls, once warmed, provided steady, non-drying heat that reduced respiratory stress. Direct fire heat dries air and cracks skin in cold climates. Vikings avoided that by sleeping where humidity and warmth were stable. They also slept elevated, often above animal level, which reduced exposure to waste gases and cold air pooling near the floor. Furs and wool acted as vapor barriers as much as insulation, trapping body moisture to prevent hypothermia. This is why Viking bedding finds include layered textiles rather than thick single blankets. Anyone applying this today should think vertically. Cold air sinks, heat rises. Where you sleep matters more than how much fuel you burn. Why this knowledge faded and was rarely taught beyond family lines is, a story shaped by sweeping change. When Christianity spread and settlement patterns shifted, communal living declined. Homes became smaller, animals moved outside, and imported building styles replaced turf architecture. The old system required constant labour and generational knowledge. It simply did not survive abstraction. Written sources barely mention it because, honestly, it was considered common sense among those who needed it and irrelevant to those who didn't. In Greenland, when the climate cooled further during the Little Ice Age, settlements that had already abandoned these techniques collapsed first. Those who maintained them lasted longest. Silence was not conspiracy. It was survival triage. How this technique reframes Viking resilience entirely is, I think, rather profound. This was not brute endurance. It was environmental mastery at the household level. Every wall, animal, and sleeping place served a purpose. That is the lesson serious historians and survivalists should take away. Technology does not need complexity. It needs coherence. If this deep dive changed how you think about Viking survival, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts. Share this with someone who still thinks Vikings survived on toughness alone. And, stay tuned. There is more buried knowledge waiting to be uncovered.